Is a debate on motion number 13160 in the name of Bruce Crawford on new powers for Scotland, an interim report on the Smith Commission and the UK Government's proposals. Members who wish to speak in the debate should press the request to speak button now, and I call on Bruce Crawford to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the Devolution Further Powers Committee.
Presiding Officer, the Devolution Further Powers Committee was established in October last year. Its task to scrutinise proposals for further devolution arising out of the recommendations of the Smith Commission. It is our interim report published last week that we are here to debate today. This is the committee's initial view of the proposals thus far. Across the committee, we believe a report to be constructive, balanced and objective. We may differ across the committee on the powers we consider the Scottish Parliament should have, but what is clear is that we speak with a common voice in saying that, as a minimum, the spirit and substance of the Smith Commission recommendations must be delivered in full, in legislative terms and in the actions of both governments. Our conclusions was that in significant areas the draft clauses published in January by the previous UK Government unfortunately do not meet that objective. The committee has called on the new UK Government to seriously consider the areas which we have highlighted, which we believe the draft clauses fall short in. The UK Government must ensure that the bill, expected to be published next week, is strengthened to fully deliver on the Smith recommendations. As a committee, we set ourselves 4 very clear and specific tasks in scrutinising proposals for further devolution. Firstly, to assess whether the draft legislative clauses published by the UK Government implemented the Smith Commission recommendations. Secondly, to engage as widely as possible with stakeholders, communities and individuals. Thirdly, to obtain as wide a range of expert opinion as possible within the timeframe available. And lastly, to publish a report which should seek to influence the content and development of a new Scotland Bill. I'll let others judge whether we have met those objectives. I do, however, wish to thank all of those who provided evidence to the committee, whether in formal evidence sessions, at informal meetings, in local communities or at public meetings in Hamilton, Aberdeen or Shetland. In order to assist us in our task, we appointed 3 advisers. They were namely Christine O'Neill to provide advice on constitutional matters, Dr Heidi Poon dealing with taxation, and Professor Nicola McEwen with regard to welfare. Presiding Officer, I wish to put on record, and that of the committee, for the assistance of our advisers provided us in developing this report. I would also like to put on record our thanks to our clerking team, so ably led by Stephen Imrie. They did a fantastic job in preparing us in terms of the witnesses that were called and in helping to pull together our report. Most of all, however, I want to thank my fellow committee members for the mature, professional manner in which they approached their work. Our report has been agreed unanimously by all members of the committee. In my view, it carries far greater weight as a consequence of that. The recommendations we make are intended to be constructive and assist the UK Government in producing legislation that will implement the Smith recommendations. It's important to note, though, in certain areas such as the devolution of air passenger duty and aggregates levy, the draft clauses do indeed meet the aims of the Smith Commission as far as the committee was concerned. But because of the time available, I have to focus on the broad areas where the committee found the draft clauses were not fit for purpose. In a wide range of areas, the committee considered that either clarification was required on the effect of a clause or that amendment was required to the clauses as currently drafted. Perhaps the most significant area where we considered that to be was on welfare. Specifically, the committee considered that the draft welfare clauses would not provide a Scottish Government with the power to, for instance, create new benefits in the areas of devolved responsibility or make discretionary payments in any area of welfare. The definitions of a carer and of disability would significantly constrain the policy autonomy of future Scottish Government in these areas. And the committee also considers that the clauses do not devolve all the powers over support for unemployed people expected by Smith. For example, the Access to Work programme would appear to remain reserved. We seek assurances that winter fuel payments will be devolved, and where there to be a future Scottish Government introduces a new benefit or top-up, that this will not result in any offsetting of reduction in a UK benefit. Now, the interaction of devolved and reserved powers is critical across many of the Smith Commission proposals. Universal credit provides an example of one such proposed shared power. In that light, the committee considered that the draft clauses at 20 in brackets 4 and 21 in brackets 3 could be considered or perceived to be a veto and need to be looked at again. More generally, we recommended that the principles which would inform intergovernmental working on welfare require to be placed in statute. That's a summary of our recommendations on welfare, and other members will no doubt want to go into more detail on these recommendations in due course. The draft welfare clauses are the area where perhaps most concerns rest, because they are potentially also the most complex to implement. And I know that's an area that's been carefully scrutinised by the Welfare Reform Committee. Presiding Officer, these clauses will impact upon some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged individuals in Scottish society. And that reminded me of a quote that Sir Harry Burns is fond of recalling, of a Los Angeles priest who said to him, "What we need is compassion that stands in awe at the burdens the poor have to carry, rather than stands in judgment at the way they carry it." It's therefore essential that legislation in this area not only implements the spirit and substance of Smith, but is also capable of being implemented efficiently. The taxation powers proposed for devolution by Smith will also result in a significant degree of shared power between the Scottish and UK governments. Here, the most critical elements of the operation of powers is in the areas that weren't dealt with by draft clauses. Instead, the operation of these powers will be governed by a new fiscal framework which is currently being developed. While the operation of the no detriment principle and block grant adjustment may sound esoteric, these issues are absolutely critical to the effective operation of these powers. In this area, the committee is grateful for the work that has been undertaken by the Finance Committee, who found clear differences between the Scottish and UK governments regarding the no detriment principle. Similarly, we recommend that greater clarity is required with regard to how no detriment will operate in practice. We have also made a number of detailed recommendations relating to the implementation of the taxation proposals, such as how to determine what constitutes Scottish VAT, but I will leave that for others to discuss. On borrowing, the draft clauses were silent on how a new borrowing regime will operate. Accordingly, any early understanding of what borrowing powers are being devolved should be a high priority for both governments at this point. In the committee's view, a move towards a prudential regime would provide a sensible approach. We also recommend that future Scottish governments should be able to retain any underspend in order to better manage volatility in income. Clearly, the current borrowing powers of the Scottish Government are too restrictive to cope with this new era of fiscal devolution. It is therefore imperative that the borrowing regime entered into provides genuine flexibility to future Scottish administrations.